a man saved a blind bobcat kitten. But then, an unexpected surprise awaited him in the morning. What began as a single act of mercy in the middle of a storm turns into a fight he never imagined. He thought he was saving one fragile life, but when dawn broke, everything changed. Suddenly, he's caught between loyalty to the helpless and the wrath of a powerful enemy who will stop at nothing to destroy him. Danger closes in, secrets from the past resurface, and his quiet life explodes into a battle of survival. Every choice he makes could cost him everything he has left. What hidden truth will the morning reveal? And when compassion collides with vengeance, who will walk away alive? Before we dive in, say hello in the comments. I love knowing where these stories are finding a home. The wind howled through the Montana mountains like a wounded animal, rattling the windows of Clint Hargrove's weathered cabin. He sat in his old leather armchair, staring into the crackling fireplace as shadows danced across the room. His calloused hands cradled a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, much like the emptiness that had settled in his chest since losing his wife. Rain pelted against the roof in angry bursts, and thunder rolled across the valley. Clint had weathered countless storms in this cabin, but tonight felt different. The silence inside pressed against him, heavier than usual, until a sound cut through the storm's fury, a weak, desperate cry. At first he thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but there it was again, barely audible above the storm's rage. Clint set down his coffee cup and pushed himself up from the chair, his joints protesting the movement. He grabbed his heavy raincoat from its hook by the door and switched on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness as Clint stepped out onto his porch. The rain struck his face like tiny needles, and the wind tried to push him back. Another cry, clearer now, drew him toward the creek that ran behind his property. His boots squelched in the mud as he made his way down the slope, one hand shielding the flashlight. The creek had swollen with the rain, its usually gentle waters, now churning and angry. The beam of light swept across the bank until it caught something small and wet, barely moving against a fallen log. Clint's breath caught in his throat. A tiny bobcat kitten lay there, its fur matted and dirty, paws scrambling weakly against the slick wood. As he drew closer, the light revealed something that made his heart clench. The kitten's eyes were clouded over, unseeing. Well, hell, he muttered, knowing he should leave it be. Nature had its way, harsh as it sometimes was. But as the kitten let out another pitiful cry, memories of his wife flooded back. She had never been able to turn away from a creature in need, always saying that mercy wasn't a choice, it was a duty. Before he could talk himself out of it, Clint shrugged off his coat. With gentle hands that belied his rough appearance, he wrapped the trembling creature in the warm fabric. The kitten didn't fight him, too weak and cold to resist. Back in the cabin, Clint laid his coat on the floor near the fireplace. The kitten was so small, couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Its clouded eyes blinked slowly in the firelight, and Clint could see now that the blindness was likely something it had been born with. He ran his fingers through his gray-streaked beard, considering his options. The humane thing might be to end its suffering quickly. A blind bobcat wouldn't last long in the wild. It was nature's way. He had his rifle in the corner, clean and quick. The kitten stirred in the coat, turning its face toward the warmth of the fire. Despite its condition, despite everything working against it, it was fighting to live. Something in Clint's chest softened, a wall he'd built years ago beginning to crack. "Suppose you deserve a chance," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. He went to the kitchen and found an old towel, then gently began drying the kitten's fur. Its tiny body trembled under his touch, but it didn't shy away. He warmed some milk on the stove. Remembering how his wife had once cared for an injured fawn, "You'd know exactly what to do," he murmured to the empty room. The thought brought both pain and purpose. He might not know much about caring for a wild animal, but he knew enough about survival. Using an eyedropper he found in an old first kit, Clint carefully fed the kitten small amounts of warm milk. Its tiny pink tongue lapped eagerly at the drops, strength seemingly returning with each swallow. "Well, look at you," Clint said softly as the kitten finished feeding. "Got some fight in you after all." He arranged a small box near the fireplace, lining it with soft towels. The kitten settled into its makeshift bed, its breathing evening out into sleep. Clint sank back into his armchair, watching the rise and fall of the tiny chest. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. The decision to save the kitten felt like a step away from the solitude he'd wrapped around himself like armor since his wife's passing. He knew it wouldn't be easy. A blind bobcat kitten needed more care than he might be able to give. But as he watched the small creature sleep, peaceful despite everything it had endured, Clint felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The stirring of hope, and with it, the weight of responsibility he thought he'd left behind. The fire crackled softly, and outside, the storm began to ease, as if nature itself was acknowledging the small act of mercy that had taken place in this remote cabin in the Montana wilderness. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows, casting warm patches on the wooden floor. Clint knelt beside the makeshift bed he'd created for the blind bobcat kitten, carefully dropping warm milk onto its eager tongue. The tiny creature had made it through the night, growing stronger with each feeding. The sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled his attention away. Through the window, he saw a gleaming black pickup truck rolling to a stop in front of his cabin. His jaw tightened. Rhett Connolly's truck. The wealthy rancher owned most of the land bordering Clint's modest property, and their history wasn't friendly. Heavy boots stomped up the porch steps, followed by 3 sharp knocks that seemed to shake the whole cabin. The kitten startled at the sound, pressing closer to the towel nest. "Just a minute," Clint called out, his voice gravelly. He gave the kitten one last gentle pat before rising to answer the door. Rhett Connolly filled the doorframe. His expensive ranch were a stark contrast to Clint's worn flannel shirt and jeans. The rancher's sharp eyes swept past Clint into the cabin. "Word travels fast around here, Hargrove," Rhett said, not bothering with a greeting. "Heard you took in some wild animal last night?" Clint stood his ground in the doorway. "News sure does get around. One of my hands saw your lights down by the creek during the storm." Rhett's gaze finally settled on Clint's face. "Said you carried something back." "That's right." Well, Rhett's patience was already wearing thin. "What'd you find?" Clint considered lying, but there wasn't much point. The truth would come out eventually. "Bobcat kitten, blind one nearly drowned in the storm." Rhett's face darkened. "A bobcat? Have you lost your mind, Hargrove? Those things are predators. It'll grow up to be a danger to my livestock." "It's blind," Clint repeated. "Can barely find its milk, let alone hunt. All the more reason to put it down now." Rhett took a step forward, trying to peer around Clint. "Where is it?" "That's not going to happen." Clint didn't move from the doorway. Rhett's face flushed red. "Listen here, Hargrove. This isn't like you refusing to guide my hunt 5 years ago. This is about public safety. That animal is a threat. The only threat I'm seeing right now is standing on my porch," Clint said quietly. Rhett's hands clenched into fists. "You're making a mistake. That thing needs to be destroyed before it becomes a problem. Hand it over." "No." The word hung between them like a challenge. Rhett's eyes narrowed to slits. "Don't forget who you're dealing with, Hargrove. I've got friends in the Fish and Wildlife Service. One phone call about an illegally captured wild animal, ... double quotes. Go ahead," Clint said. "Make your call. Tell them how a blind baby bobcat is threatening your 1,000-acre ranch." Rhett jabbed a finger at Clint's chest. "This isn't over. That cat's not staying here one way or another." The rancher turned and stormed back to his truck. The engine roared to life, and gravel sprayed as he backed out and sped away. Clint's hands were shaking as he closed the door. He hadn't stood up to anyone like that since his wife died. The confrontation left him feeling drained, but somehow more alive than he had in years. A soft mewling drew him back to the fireplace. The kitten had crawled to the edge of its box, nose twitching as it tried to sense where he was. Clint settled down beside it, gently scooping it back into its nest of towels. "Guess we're in this together now, little one," he murmured as he watched the kitten navigate its dark world with cautious paws. Something struck him. The way it moved so carefully, testing each step, reminded him of his own life these past few years. After losing his wife, he'd withdrawn into himself, becoming blind to the world in his own way. He'd built walls, shut out connections, fumbled through his days like this tiny creature feeling its way through the darkness. The kitten's paw found his hand, and it pressed against him, seeking warmth and comfort despite its inability to see him. Despite its blindness, it trusted. Despite its wounds, it reached out. Clint stroked its soft fur, feeling the steady beat of its heart. "Maybe we can both learn to see again," he said softly. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warming them both as they sat together. Two wounded souls finding unexpected comfort in each other's company. The first rays of dawn crept over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Clint moved around his cabin with quiet purpose, preparing the blind kitten's morning meal. He'd barely slept, keeping watch over his tiny charge through the night. A scratching sound at his front door made him pause. The blind kitten was safely in its box, still sleeping. He grabbed his old hunting rifle from beside the door, threats from yesterday still fresh in his mind. The scratching came again, softer this time, followed by a familiar sound that made his heart skip, the distinct mewl of a bobcat kitten. Clint eased the door open, rifle ready. There, huddled against the morning chill, was a second bobcat kitten, smaller than the first, but bright-eyed and alert. It looked up at him, and let out another pitiful cry. "Well, I'll be damned," Clint whispered, lowering his rifle. The kitten didn't run. Instead, it took a tentative step toward the doorway, nose working overtime as it caught the scent of its sibling inside. Clint's mind raced. The blind kitten hadn't been abandoned after all. This little one must have been searching for its brother or sister all night. From inside, the blind kitten called out, as if sensing its sibling's presence. The second kitten's ears perked up, and it darted past Clint's boots into the cabin. Clint watched as the two kittens reunited. The seeing one nuzzled its blind sibling with such gentleness it made his throat tight. They curled together in the box, two tiny bodies finding comfort in each other's warmth. "Twice the trouble now," he muttered, but there was no real hesitation. In his heart, he couldn't separate them, wouldn't. The morning passed quietly as Clint adjusted to caring for two wild creatures instead of one. The seeing kitten was protective, watching his every move with wary eyes as he tended to its blind sibling. But hunger soon won out over caution, and both kittens eagerly accepted the warm milk he offered. Around noon, the rumble of engines drew his attention. Through his window, he counted 3 trucks pulling up to his cabin. His stomach nodded as he recognized Rhett's black pickup leading the small convoy. Doors slammed, and boots crunched on gravel. Clint stepped onto his porch, closing the cabin door firmly behind him. "Quite a collection you're starting, Hargrove," Rhett called out, his voice carrying across the yard. 2 local ranchers flanked him, men Clint knew by sight but had never spoken to. "Word is you've got yourself a pair of predators now." "News sure travels fast," Clint said evenly. "Like wildfire," one of the other ranchers agreed, "spitting into the dirt and twice as dangerous." Rhett took a step forward, playing to his audience. "1 blind bobcat was bad enough, Hargrove. But 2? You're putting every ranch in this valley at risk." "They're just kittens," Clint said. "For now," the third man cut in. "But they grow. They hunt. They kill." Rhett nodded in agreement. "We've all lost calves to bobcats before. You going to pay for our losses when these pets of yours get bigger?" "They're not pets," Clint said. "And they're not your problem." "Like hell they're not," Rhett snapped. "I've already called Fish and Wildlife. They'll be interested to know you're harboring dangerous predators." The threat hung in the air, but Clint thought of the 2 tiny creatures inside, one blind and helpless, the other loyal enough to find its way through a storm to its sibling. His voice grew stronger. "You do what you have to do, Rhett, but those kittens stay with me until they're strong enough to survive on their own. You're making enemies, Hargrove," one of the ranchers warned. "Might want to think about that." "Already thought about it," Clint replied. He squared his shoulders, feeling more certain with each word. "And I'm not changing my mind." Rhett's face darkened with fury. "You're going to regret this, Hargrove. Mark my words." He turned to the other men. "Come on, we've got calls to make." Clint watched them leave, their trucks kicking up dust clouds in their wake. Inside, he found the kittens still curled together in their box. The seeing one raised its head at his approach, while the blind one purred contentedly in its sleep. Looking at them, Clint felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. These creatures needed him, and he needed them, though he couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was their vulnerability, or their fierce will to survive despite the odds. Or maybe it was the way they reminded him that even in darkness, there was still hope for light. He settled into his chair near their box, watching as the seeing kitten finally relaxed enough to close its eyes. "We'll figure this out," he promised them softly, together. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Clint's yard when another vehicle approached his cabin. Unlike Rhett's aggressive entrance earlier, this one moved slowly, carefully navigating the rutted drive. A forest green pickup truck came to a gentle stop, and a woman in well-worn hiking boots stepped out. She moved with purpose, carrying a canvas bag over her shoulder. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical knot, and her face bore the weathered look of someone who spent most of their time outdoors. "Mr. Hargrove," she called out. "I'm Nora Keene. I work with wildlife rehabilitation." In the county, Clint tensed, his hand automatically reaching for the doorframe. "If Rhett Connolly sent you, nobody sent me," she interrupted, holding up her hands. "I heard about the bobcat kittens and came to see for myself. May I?" Something in her direct manner made him pause. She wasn't demanding or threatening like Rhett, just straightforward. After a moment's hesitation, Clint nodded and stepped aside. Inside, Nora moved quietly, careful not to startle the kittens. She knelt beside their box, her movements slow and practiced. The seeing kitten watched her warily while its blind sibling continued to sleep. "How long have you had them?" she asked, her voice soft. "Found the blind one 2 nights ago during the storm. The other showed up this morning." Nora nodded, studying the kittens with experienced eyes. "They're young, maybe 3 weeks old." "The blind one? Was it born that way?" "Think so." Eyes never opened. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small flashlight. "May I check them?" I promised to be gentle. Clint's protective instinct flared, but he forced himself to stay quiet as she carefully examined each kitten. Her touch was sure but tender, and the kittens seemed to sense her experience with wild creatures. "They're actually in surprisingly good shape," she said finally. "You've been feeding them milk, warmed up like I used to do for orphaned lambs." A small smile touched her lips. "Good instinct, but they'll need more specialized care as they grow." "I can help with that," Clint stiffened. "I can manage." "I'm sure you can," Nora said, meeting his gaze steadily. "But you don't have to do it alone. Rhett Connolly's already making noise with Fish and Wildlife. Having a licensed rehabilitator involved will help protect them." The mention of protection made Clint's resistance waver. "What kind of help?" "Proper formula. For starters, teaching you how to prepare them for eventual release. Documentation that proves they're being cared for responsibly." She paused, then added quietly, "And maybe just having someone else who understands why they're worth saving." Something in her words struck a chord in Clint's chest. An echo of the loneliness he'd grown so used to he barely noticed it anymore. He looked at the kittens, remembering how it felt to make that first choice to help rather than turn away. "I'm not looking to take them from you," Nora continued, "but Rhett's got influence with local officials. He's already pushing for authorization. To remove what he calls the threat, we'll have a better chance of protecting them if we work together. Clint ran a hand through his graying hair. Considering the kittens needed more than just his stubborn determination, they needed someone who knew how to give them their best chance at survival. Twice a week, he said finally. You can come. Twice a week to check on them. Nora's face softened with understanding. That's fair. I'll bring supplies tomorrow. Proper formula, feeding equipment, some things to help with their development. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a business card. My number's on here. Call anytime if you need help or advice. Clint. She waited until he looked at her. You did the right thing, saving them. As she turned to leave, the blind kitten stirred and mewed softly. Its sibling immediately moved closer, providing comfort through touch. Nora watched them with a gentle smile. They're lucky, you know, she said. Not just because you found them, but because you were willing to stand up for them. That's rarer than you might think. After she drove away, Clint sat in his chair near the kitten's box, turning her card. Over in his hands, the late sun streamed through his window, warming the cabin's worn floorboards. For the first time in years, the silence felt less like a wall and more like a space waiting to be filled. The blind kitten stretched out a tiny paw, batting at its sibling's tail. Their simple trust in each other, their resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, it stirred something in Clint's chest, something that felt almost like hope. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Nora arrived early, her truck loaded with supplies for the makeshift sanctuary. Clint watched from his porch as she unloaded wooden pallets, chicken wire, and various tools. Found these at the rehabilitation center, she explained, hefting a pallet. We can build something temporary, but secure. Clint nodded, already moving to help. They worked side by side in the cool morning air, converting a corner of his covered porch into a protected space. His experienced hands made quick work of the construction, while Nora's knowledge guided the design. They'll need climbing spaces, she said, securing a section of chicken wire, and somewhere dark to hide when they're scared. Clint remembered an old wooden crate in his shed. Might have something that'll work. As he walked to the shed, memories surfaced of building things with Sarah, his late wife. She'd always loved creating spaces for injured creatures they'd found. The familiar ache in his chest made him pause at the shed door. You okay? Nora called from the porch. Fine, he answered quickly, pushing the door open. The crate sat exactly where he'd left it years ago, still holding Sarah's gardening tools. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it. Back at the sanctuary, they worked together to transform the crate into a den. Nora seemed to sense his mood and kept her focus on the task, not pressing him to talk. The silence between them was comfortable, filled only with the sounds of hammering and the occasional mew from the kittens watching from their box. By late afternoon, they'd created a secure space that would give the kittens room to grow and play while staying protected. Nora stood back, surveying their work with satisfaction. This is good, she said. They'll be safe here. Clint wished he could share her confidence. Something about Rhett's last visit had left him uneasy. The man's anger had seemed too personal, too deep for just concern about livestock. That night, after Nora left, Clint's instincts proved right. He was doing his final check of the property when movement caught his eye near the tree line. The beam of his flashlight revealed fresh boot prints in the mud. Someone had been there recently, following the tracks. He discovered something that made his blood run cold. Half hidden under leaves lay a steel trap, its teeth gleaming dully in the flashlight beam. Beside it, a piece of meat gave off a sickly sweet smell that meant only one thing: poison. Looking for something? Hargrove. Rhett's voice came from the darkness. Clint turned slowly, keeping his flashlight steady. Rhett stood between two trees, his bulk casting a heavy shadow. You're trespassing, Connolly? Clint's voice was quiet but hard. Funny thing about trespassing, Rhett said, taking a step forward. Sometimes it's necessary when people won't see reason. There's nothing reasonable about poison traps. Those cats are vermin. They'll grow up to kill livestock worth thousands. But this isn't just about the cats, is it? Rhett's face twisted into a sneer. This is about you playing hero, like always. Still can't let go of that moral high ground. Even after all these years, Clint's hands clenched. Get off my land, or what? You'll report me. Rhett laughed harshly. To who? The same rangers who remember how you cost them their biggest owner when you refused to guide my hunts. Face it, Hargrove, you've got no friends left up here. Last warning, Rhett. No, this is your last warning. Rhett closed the distance between them, his voice dropping to a growl. Those cats disappear, or I handle this my way. And believe me, you won't like my way. The threat hung in the air between them. Clint held his ground, though every muscle screamed for action. One wrong move now could make things much worse. Your choice, Rhett said finally, backing away. But, remember, accidents happen in these mountains all the time. Two people and animals both. After Rhett's footsteps faded, Clint carefully disabled the trap and buried the poisoned meat deep where no animal would find it. His hands shook with rage and something else. Fear, not for himself, but for the innocent lives now depending on him. Back in the cabin, he checked on the kittens. They slept peacefully in their box, the blind one curled against its sibling. The sight steadied him, but couldn't completely calm his racing thoughts. Rhett's threats weren't idle. The man had money and influence, and a long memory for grudges. The trap tonight was just the beginning. Every choice Clint made from now on could mean life or death for the kittens, and maybe for himself too. He sat in his chair, watching the kittens sleep, knowing that tomorrow he'd have to tell Nora about tonight's confrontation. The sanctuary they'd built suddenly seemed fragile against the darkness waiting outside. But as he listened to the soft purring of the kittens, Clint knew he couldn't back down. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The morning after Rhett's threats, Clint's nerves were raw. Every shadow made him jump. Every rustle in the trees caught his attention. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night watching over the kittens. Around mid-morning, he decided to move them to higher ground, away from the areas where Rhett might easily access. The old hiking trail behind his cabin led to a secluded clearing that would be perfect for their temporary sanctuary. Clint gathered the kittens into a padded box, careful with the blind one who still stumbled more than its sibling. The healthy kitten pressed close to its brother, as always, guiding and protecting. Their bond reminded him of something he'd lost long ago. The trail wound upward through dense pine forest. Clint stepped carefully, keeping the box steady. A light drizzle had made the path slick, and loose rocks shifted under his boots. The blind kitten mewed softly, sensing his tension. "Easy there," he murmured. "Almost there." That's when he heard it, a crack like a gunshot. His head snapped up, searching for danger. In that split second of distraction, his foot caught on a root. The box tilted. Before he could steady it, both kittens tumbled out. No, the healthy kitten landed on solid ground, but its blind sibling rolled toward the edge of the trail. The rain-softened earth crumbled beneath its weight. Without thinking, Clint lunged forward. His fingers caught the scruff of the blind kitten's neck, just as the ground gave way completely. The momentum carried them both over the edge. Clint twisted his body, trying to protect the tiny creature as they slid down the muddy slope. Rocks tore at his clothes. Sharp branches whipped his face. His free hand scrambled for purchase, finding nothing but loose earth. Below, he could see the drop-off where the ravine fell away into jagged rocks. 20 feet from the edge, his shoulder slammed into a half-buried log. Pain shot through his arm, but he managed to hook his elbow around it. They jerked to a stop, hanging precariously above the deadly drop. The blind kitten trembled in his grip, but stayed still, as if understanding the danger. Above, he heard the healthy kitten crying out for its sibling. Slowly, carefully, Clint pulled the blind one close to his chest. "I've got you," he whispered. "I won't let go." It took nearly an hour to climb back up, moving inch by inch, testing each handhold. By the time he reached the trail, his clothes were shredded, and blood ran from dozens of cuts. The healthy kitten rushed to its sibling, checking it over with gentle paws. Clint sat heavily on a fallen log, shaking with exhaustion and leftover fear. He couldn't lose them. Somewhere along the way, these tiny lives had become his reason for getting up each morning. The sound of tires on gravel reached him from below. Nora's truck. He'd forgotten she was coming to check on them. Gathering the kittens, he made his way slowly back to the cabin. Nora's eyes widened when she saw him. "What happened?" "Nearly lost them," he said simply, setting the box down carefully. Insisted on cleaning his cuts, though he protested he could do it himself. As she worked, he found himself talking, really talking, for the first time in years. "Sarah loved animals," he said quietly. "My wife, she never could stand to see anything suffer. Always bringing home injured creatures, nursing them back to health." Nora's hands paused briefly, then continued cleaning a deep scratch on his arm. "How long has she been gone?" 5 years. The words felt rusty in his throat. "Cancer. Nothing we could do but watch it take her. All my skills as a guide, all my knowledge of survival, none of it mattered. I couldn't save her." The blind kitten bumped against his leg, purring softly. Its sibling followed, both settling against him as if trying to offer comfort. After that, I couldn't see the point anymore. Guiding felt meaningless. Everything felt meaningless. So I just stopped. Stopped guiding, stopped helping, stopped living really. He looked down at the kittens. Until these two showed up. "They needed you," Nora said softly, "just like you needed them." Clint nodded slowly. "Sarah would have loved them. She would have... His voice caught. "She would have been right there in that ravine with me, trying to save them. She sounds like an amazing woman." She was. Clint stroked the blind kitten's head gently. "These two, they fight so hard to live, even with everything against them. The blind one especially. Reminds me of her. She never gave up, right to the end." The kittens had fallen asleep against his leg. The healthy one curled protectively around its blind sibling. Looking at them, Clint felt something shift inside him, a wall crumbling, a door opening to light he'd forgotten existed. "I can't let anything happen to them," he said firmly, "no matter what Rhett tries." Nora's hand found his, squeezing gently. "You won't have to protect them alone." As evening settled over the mountains, Clint and Nora sat at his worn kitchen table, cups of coffee growing cold between them. The kittens slept nearby in their makeshift bed, exhausted from the day's events. There's something that doesn't add up about Rhett, Nora said, breaking the comfortable silence. His reaction to these kittens is extreme. Even for him. I've dealt with ranchers worried about predators before, but this ish, she shook her head. This feels personal. Clint's fingers tightened around his mug. The memory he'd been avoiding rose to the surface, sharp and clear as the day it happened. Because it is personal, he said quietly. It goes back about 7 years. Before Sarah got sick, he stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gathering darkness. Rhett hired me for a guided hunt. Said he wanted to bag a mountain lion. Everything seemed normal at first, until I found out what he really had in mind. Nora leaned forward, listening intently. He'd already spotted a female with cubs. Wanted me to lead him right to their den. Clint's jaw clenched. It was spring. Hunting season was closed. The cubs were too young to survive alone. Everything about it was illegal, but Rhett didn't care. Said he'd pay double my usual rate. And you refused, Nora said softly. I did more than refuse. A bitter smile crossed Clint's face. I reported him to Fish and Wildlife. Nothing came of it, no proof. And Rhett had too many friends in high places. But word got around. Some of his high society hunting buddies started using other guides. His reputation took a hit. That's why he's so determined to destroy these kittens, Nora realized. It's not about protecting his livestock at all. It's revenge. Clint nodded. He's been waiting for a chance to get back at me. These kittens gave him the perfect excuse. He turned back to face her. I've seen that look in his eyes before. When I turned him down, he won't stop until he either gets what he wants or someone makes him stop. The blind kitten stirred in its sleep, making small distressed sounds. Its sibling immediately pressed closer, offering comfort. Nora watched them for a moment, then straightened in her chair. Then we make him stop, she said firmly. Legally? I have contacts at the wildlife department, people who actually care about doing what's right. We can apply for special rehabilitation, permits, document everything. You really think that'll work? Clint's voice held doubt, but also a spark of hope. It's better than waiting for him to escalate further. Nora pulled out her phone and started making notes. We'll need to prove the blind kitten needs special care, that separating the siblings would be harmful to both. We can get veterinary documentation, establish a proper rehabilitation plan. Clint walked over to the sleeping kittens, gently stroking the blind one's fur. All these years I've just been trying to stay out of everyone's way. Keep to myself. But I can't just stand by and let Rhett hurt them. No, Nora agreed. You can't, and you shouldn't have to. She stood and joined him by the kittens. What? You did back then, refusing to help Rhett kill that mountain lion and her cubs. It was the right thing, just like saving these kittens is the right thing. Sarah used to say that too, Clint said softly. That doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you. She was right. Nora touched his arm gently. And you're not alone in this fight anymore. The healthy kitten woke up and stretched, blinking at them with bright eyes. Its blind sibling stirred, reaching out until they touched, always needing to know the other was near. Looking at them, Clint felt his resolve strengthen. First thing, tomorrow, he said, we start gathering whatever documentation you think we need. If Rhett wants a fight, he'll get one. But this time, we're doing it by the book. Nora smiled. I'll make some calls tonight. Get the ball rolling. She gathered her things to leave, then paused at the door. You know, standing up to bullies like Rhett, that takes the same kind of courage it took to rescue these kittens. Some people might have looked the other way, both times. But you didn't. After she left, Clint sat watching the kittens sleep, thinking about choices and consequences, about doing what's right even when it's hard. The truth about Rhett's vendetta should have worried him more, but somehow it had the opposite effect. Understanding his enemy's true motivation made the path forward clearer. This wasn't just about 2 orphan bobcat kittens anymore. It was about standing up to cruelty, about protecting the vulnerable, the very things he'd once believed in so strongly, before grief had made him forget who he was. The blind kitten stirred and lifted its head, seeming to look right at him. Despite its clouded eyes, Clint reached down to scratch behind its ears. Don't worry, he whispered. This time, we're fighting back. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows as Nora spread the official documents across Clint's kitchen table. Her hands smoothed over the papers bearing the wildlife department's seal. It's not permanent, she explained, but these temporary permits protect the kittens while we work on the full rehabilitation plan. No one can legally touch them now. Clint picked up one of the documents, his weathered fingers tracing over the official text. Hard to believe we got this so quick. My contacts came through. Nora smiled, watching the healthy kitten bat playfully at its blind sibling. Once I explained the situation and sent them the vet's report about the blind one's condition, they fast-tracked it. They're especially interested in our plan to release them in the protected wilderness area up north. When do you think they'll be ready? Clint asked, his voice carrying a mix of hope and concern. A few more weeks. The blind one's getting stronger every day, and they work so well together. Nora gathered the papers into a folder. The healthy one compensates for its sibling's disability. They'll have a better chance as a pair. The afternoon passed peacefully. As they worked on reinforcing the kitten's temporary enclosure, Clint found himself watching Nora more than usual, appreciating how naturally she handled the young bobcats. How her face lit up when they responded to her care. As evening approached, the wind picked up, carrying with it the first hint of trouble. Smoke. Clint noticed it first, his head snapping up as he scanned the darkening sky. "You smell that?" Nora paused in her work, nostrils flaring. "Smoke, but it's not wood smoke. They rounded the corner of the cabin together and froze. Flames were already consuming one side of Clint's old barn, the dry wood catching like kindling. Through the spreading fire, Clint caught a glimpse of a familiar truck speeding away down the access road. "Rhett," he growled, rage and fear mixing in his chest. "The wind's pushing the fire this way. We need to get the kittens out, now." They raced to the enclosure as embers began to rain down around them. The kittens were already agitated, sensing the danger. The blind one mewled in distress as its sibling pressed against it protectively. Here, Nora thrust a pet carrier at Clint. "Get them in while I grab the emergency supplies and documents." Clint worked quickly but gently, speaking in low, soothing tones as he coaxed the frightened kittens into the carrier. The heat from the barn fire was intensifying, and he could hear the ancient wood cracking and groaning as it burned. Nora burst out of the cabin, clutching their folder of documents and a bag of supplies. "The fire's spreading faster than I thought. We need to." A tremendous crash cut her off as part of the barn's roof collapsed, sending a fountain of sparks into the air. The dry grass between the barn and cabin began to catch, creating a wall of flame that cut off their access to the road. "This way," Clint shouted, grabbing the carrier in one hand and Nora's arm with the other. "There's a creek access trail behind the cabin." They ran, ducking low under the thickening smoke. The kittens were eerily quiet now, huddled together in their carrier. Behind them, the sound of the fire grew to a roar as it devoured the barn and reached for the cabin. The trail was narrow and treacherous in the growing darkness. Made worse by the shifting shadows cast by the flames, Nora stumbled on loose rocks, and Clint pulled her steady without breaking stride. They could feel the heat at their backs as they pushed through dense undergrowth. Finally, they broke through to the creek bed. The water was low this time of year, but the rocky ground would stop the fire's advance. They crossed carefully, the kittens swaying in their carrier, and climbed the opposite bank until they reached a clear vantage point, panting. They turned to watch as flames engulfed Clint's barn completely and began to lick at the edges of his cabin. The fire department would come, but it would be too late to save either structure. In the distance, they could hear sirens beginning to wail. "Everything I own is in there," Clint said quietly, his voice rough with smoke and emotion. Nora gripped his free hand tightly. "But we're alive. The kittens are safe. And we have proof now. Proof of what Rhett's willing to do." Clint looked down at the carrier, where two pairs of eyes, one clear, one clouded, gazed back at him. Despite everything he'd just lost, he felt a fierce surge of triumph. Rhett had meant to destroy everything, to force Clint to give up the kittens. Instead, he'd only proved how far he would go to satisfy his vendetta. "He showed his hand," Clint said, straightening his shoulders. "Set fire to my property to try to kill 2 orphaned kittens. Even his friends in high places won't be able to ignore this." "No," Nora agreed, pulling out her phone to document the blaze. "They won't. And we have everything we need right here. The permits, the documentation, and now evidence of his retaliation." The blind kitten let out a soft cry, and its sibling immediately responded with a comforting purr. Even in the carrier, they stayed connected, supporting each other. Watching them, Clint felt his resolve harden into steel. The acrid smell of smoke still hung heavy in the morning air as Clint and Nora picked through the charred remains of his property. The kittens huddled in their carrier, pressed together, for comfort, refusing food or water. Their soft, distressed mewls tore at Clint's heart. "They're still in shock," Nora said softly, kneeling beside the carrier. "It'll take time for them to feel safe again." Clint surveyed the blackened skeleton of his barn and the partially burned cabin. The fire department had saved part of the structure, but the damage was extensive. His jaw tightened as he spotted fresh tire tracks leading away from the property. "Rhett's been back," he growled. "Probably came to admire his handiwork." Nora stood, brushing ash from her jeans. "The police have the evidence. The fire marshal confirmed it was arson, and my photos show his truck leaving the scene. It won't be enough." Clint's voice was hard with certainty. "He's got too many friends in local government. He'll wiggle out of it somehow, and then he'll try again. Next time might be worse." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we can't just wait for him to strike again. We need to end this." As if in response to his words, a distant engine roared to life. Through the trees, they spotted Rhett's truck winding up the mountain access road that led behind Clint's property. "He's heading for the old hunting trails," Clint said, recognition flooding his face. "That's where he set his first trap for the kittens. He's going to try to cut off our escape route." Nora quickly gathered their emergency supplies. "We need to move, now." Clint grabbed the carrier, and they hurried toward his truck. The kittens remained unusually quiet, sensing the tension. As they pulled onto the road, Rhett's vehicle appeared in the rearview mirror, gaining ground rapidly. "Hold on," Clint warned, pressing the accelerator. The truck bounced roughly over the uneven mountain road. In the back seat, Nora held the carrier steady, whispering soothing words to the frightened kittens. Rhett's truck rammed them from behind, making them lurch forward. Clint fought to maintain control as they rounded a sharp bend. Ahead the road narrowed dangerously. There. Nora pointed to a familiar clearing. That's where we found his trap before. Clint's eyes narrowed with sudden understanding. The old hunting blind? It's still there. He swerved off the road into the clearing, bringing the truck to a skidding stop. Get the kittens to the blind. I'll handle Rhett. Clint, no. Trust me, he said, his voice steady. I know what I'm doing. Nora hesitated only a moment before grabbing the carrier and supplies. She disappeared into the trees just as Rhett's truck burst into the clearing. Rhett emerged from his vehicle, his face twisted with rage. Where are they, Hargrove? Gone, Clint said simply, standing his ground. It's over, Rhett. Like hell it is. Rhett charged forward, but Clint stepped aside at the last moment. The bigger man's momentum carried him forward right into the area where he'd set his own trap days before. The hidden snare, still armed and waiting, snapped shut around Rhett's ankle. He went down hard, crying out in pain and surprise. The steel teeth of his own trap bit deep, pinning him in place. Caught in your own trap, Clint said grimly. Seems fitting. Rhett thrashed and cursed, but each movement only made the trap's grip tighter. Blood began to seep through his pant leg. Nora emerged from the trees, phone in hand, already recording. Behind her came the sound of approaching vehicles, police cars, summoned by her silent emergency call when the chase began. It's done, Rhett, she said firmly. We have everything, the arson evidence, the illegal traps, and now this assault. Even your friends can't ignore it anymore. 2 police cars pulled into the clearing, followed by a game warden's truck. The officers took in the scene. Rhett caught in his own illegal trap, the evidence of his chase, the frightened but safe kittens in their carrier. As they helped Rhett into an ambulance, his face was a mask of impotent fury. The game warden examined the trap, shaking his head at its cruel design. This is a banned device, he noted. Possession alone carries a heavy penalty. Clint stood with Nora, watching as Rhett was driven away. His shoulders sagged with relief and exhaustion. Never thought it would end like this. Sometimes people get caught in the same traps they set for others, Nora said softly. Dot in the carrier. The kittens finally began to stir. The blind one emerged from behind its sibling, letting out a tentative chirp. Its brother responded with a gentle headbutt, their familiar bond asserting itself once more. The morning sun broke through the smoky haze, casting long shadows across the clearing. Clint felt the warmth on his face and, for the first time in days, allowed himself to breathe freely. The threat was over. The kittens were safe. And somehow, in fighting for their survival, he'd found something worth living for again. A month after Rhett's arrest, the morning dawned crisp and clear over the Montana wilderness. Clint stood at his cabin's newly repaired porch, watching Nora check the carriers one final time. Inside, the 2 Bobcat kittens waited quietly, their growth over the past weeks nothing short of miraculous. They're ready, Nora said softly, her practiced eyes assessing their condition. The blind one's vision has improved more than we hoped. Not perfect, but enough to survive with his brother's help. Clint nodded, his throat tight. He'd known this. Day was coming, had worked toward it, but that didn't make it any easier. The kittens had become more than just rescued animals. They represented something profound, his own journey back from the darkness. They loaded the carriers carefully into Nora's truck and began the drive deep into protected wilderness territory. The route took them far from any ranches or settlements, into a region where bobcats still roamed freely. Neither spoke much during the journey, both lost in their own thoughts. The truck finally stopped at the end of a remote fire road. Around them, ancient pines stretched toward the sky, their branches swaying gently in the mountain breeze. This was wild country, true wilderness where the bobcats could thrive. Perfect spot, Nora said, her voice carrying professional approval despite its emotional undertone. Plenty of natural shelter, water nearby, good hunting grounds. Together they carried the carriers along a narrow game trail, looking for the right clearing. The kittens stirred inside, perhaps sensing the change in their surroundings. The blind one made its familiar chirping sound, immediately answered by its sibling Dot. Clint found himself remembering that stormy night, when he'd first heard those desperate cries by the creek. Never thought finding a half-drowned kitten would change everything, he said quietly. Nora touched his arm gently. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference. They reached a protected hollow, sheltered by rock outcroppings and thick vegetation. Clint set down his carrier and knelt beside it. Through the grate, he could see both kittens, clearly no longer the fragile creatures he'd rescued, but strong young bobcats ready for their freedom. This is the hardest part, Nora warned softly. We have to let them go completely. No looking back. Clint's hands trembled slightly as he unlatched the first carrier. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the healthier kitten emerged cautiously, its muscled form moving with natural grace. It paused, scanning the surroundings with alert eyes, before turning back to wait for its sibling. The blind one came out more slowly, guided by sound and scent. Its clouded eyes had cleared somewhat during recovery, though it would never have perfect vision. But nature had compensated. Its other senses had sharpened remarkably. More importantly, it had its brother as a constant guardian. The pair moved a few steps away, still uncertain. The stronger one kept close to its sibling, their bond evident in every movement. They'd survived together, adapted together, and now they would face freedom together. Clint watched them, his chest tight with emotion. "They saved me too, you know," he said, his voice rough. "After Sarah died, I thought I was done. Just existing, not really living. These little fighters showed me different." Nora's hand found his, squeezing gently. "They needed you, and maybe you needed them just as much." The bobcats ventured further from the carriers, growing bolder with each step. The blind one stumbled slightly on uneven ground, but its brother was there instantly, steadying it. Together, they explored their new territory, their movements becoming more confident. "Look at them," Clint said wonderingly. "Not victims anymore, survivors. Just like someone else I know." Nora replied softly. He turned to her then, seeing in her eyes the same strength and compassion that had helped him through the darkest days of their struggle. In fighting for the kittens, in standing against cruelty, he'd found more than just purpose. He'd found partnership, understanding, and the chance to love again. The bobcats paused at the edge of the clearing, their wild instincts calling them. Deeper into the forest, the stronger one led the way, with its partially sighted sibling following trustingly. Just before they disappeared into the undergrowth, they turned back one final time, as if saying goodbye. Then they were gone, vanishing into their true home, leaving only disturbed leaves and profound silence behind. Clint and Nora stood together. In the clearing, their hands still clasped. The morning sun filtered through the canopy above, dappling the ground with shifting patterns of light and shadow. But unlike the shadows that had haunted Clint for so long, these held no the promise of new beginnings. "Ready to head back?" Nora asked gently. Clint took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of grief and isolation finally lifting. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready." If this ending felt like it was written for you, subscribe and join me tomorrow for another story that might feel the same.